Welcome to everyone. Welcome to Caoimhe, and thanks for Lisa for sharing information about the seminar in advance of today. We acknowledge that while we are speaking today about deaf theatre practice and deaf experience, none of our research team is deaf. We acknowledge and respect the Irish deaf community and its role in preserving, protecting, and developing the rich heritage and culture of Irish Sign Language and the work of the Irish deaf community in promoting awareness, equality, and access through ISL.
As teachers and researchers, we are committed to the principles of access, equality, diversity, and inclusion. The Lyrical Bodies project would not be possible without our participants, namely the Theatre Studies students, nor would it be possible without the collaboration of Dublin Theatre of the Deaf and Dr Amanda Coogan. As a result of our experience of their production Talk Real Fine Just Like a Lady in 2017, we have been inspired, for reasons that will emerge during this presentation, to pursue avenues that create accessible dissemination outputs and activities. By recording the seminar and making it available at a later date, we recognise that people have different responsibilities or working contracts, which might preclude them from attending in the moment. We also acknowledge that people experience and navigate the online space in diverse ways. For these reasons, for the duration of the seminar, we will spotlight Caoimhe, who is interpreting through Irish Sign Language, and you can view the ISL interpretation at all times alongside the PowerPoint presentation by clicking on View in the top right-hand side of your screen and selecting the side-by-side speaker option. We have also enabled live transcriptions, which you can hide if you wish, and in order to do this, please click on the live transcript option and select Hide Subtitles or Hide Transcript.
I'd like to introduce us all briefly and give you an idea of what to expect today. Dr Úna Kealy and Dr Kate McCarthy are each interested in theatre work that challenges exclusionary narratives. They work collaboratively to highlight and explore texts by women writers of the Southeast, and have contributed vital scholarly research on the life and work of Waterford's Teresa Deevy. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr Jenny O'Connor, and my background is in film studies. Recently, however, I've become interested in digital storytelling, which has become an additional dimension of the Lyrical Bodies project. We realise that a seminar like this requires speakers to be concise and to focus on key elements of the project, like research design or ethics, that might broadly interest many of the people here today. So we're going to try to cover a lot of ground in a short space of time. If you have additional questions, hopefully we will have time to get to those at the end. We will divide up the slides between us, and we'll give you a brief overview of the Performing the Region group and the genesis of the Lyrical Bodies project within that. That will incorporate some information on deaf culture, as well as the methodological approach and ethical challenges of such a project. I'll also talk a little bit about the rationale and aim of the digital story element before we finish up for questions. So I'll pass over to Úna now, who'll tell you a little about the Performing the Region research group.
The Performing the Region Research Collective is housed within the Analysing Social Change research group within the School of Humanities. Research team members consider theatre practice and literature emanating from the southeast of Ireland and generate creative work, including performance work, poetry, short stories, and digital stories. The Performing the Region team's research involves recouping theatre work, dramatic scripts, literary texts, and archival research material that has received little critical attention or is not widely publicly accessible. The group aims to share findings through creative practice, literary and dramatic readings, public talks, lectures, workshops, conference presentations, and academic publications. the team is committed to sharing research through open access routes.
Established in 2012, the Performing the Region team is co-led by Una and I, and includes Drs Jenny O'Connor, Fiona Ennis, Krista De Bruyne and Richard Hayes, and doctoral students Dana Killen and Aaron Kent. Funded research projects include Performing the Region, Performing Women, a project investigating Irish women playwrights of the early 1900s, Letters from the Past, an archival project considering letters from playwright Teresa Deevy to playwright James Chasty, Reshaping Narratives, an analysis of life and culture as dramatised by Irish women playwrights following the War of Independence, the timescale is 1922 to 1959, and Lyrical Bodies, a practice-based research project which we will detail today.
While we're here to talk about the Lyrical Bodies project, it's useful to put that project into context by briefly introducing Teresa Deevy and her work. Deevy was born in Waterford in 1894. She was deafened by Meniere's disease in her early 20s. She learned to lip read and became a playwright in the 1920s. She lived and worked in Waterford and Dublin, writing plays for theatre and radio, short stories, literary journalism, and a ballet. The ballet is entitled Possession, and it is the text upon which the Lyrical Bodies project is formed. Deevy died in 1963. The image shown here is taken from an Abbey Theatre festival programme in 1937, when her play Katie Roach was programmed for an Abbey Theatre production before touring to America, alongside the work of Augusta Gregory, W.B. Yeats, Sean O'Casey, Lennox Robinson, and Dennis Johnson. Themes of challenging accepted norms of social and personal conduct and the compromises of marriage for women in particular constitute central preoccupations within Deevy's work, which exposes how restrictive social and religious orthodoxies corralled women and men into reduced ways of being. Deevy's plays critique the ways in which power operates hierarchically and directionally, and provide a disciplined and intimate scrutiny of women's life experience. We read Deevy's work as a feminist intervention into Irish social and cultural life, which creates spaces of critical consideration, for the social and cultural systems that created constraining norms of gender, race, class, and sexuality, which remain relevant today. Deevy's texts create what Elaine Aston calls spaces of resistance and offer what Bell Hooks terms moments of radical possibility to imagine alternative and more inclusive societies.
Our collaboration with Amanda Coogan began in 2013 with a performance entitled Promenade, programmed as part of the Imagine Arts Festival in Waterford. I facilitated this one-day event, which took place in the chapel on the College Street campus and involved theatre studies and visual art students performing with Coogan over the course of several hours. As an opportunity for students and staff to work with an internationally acclaimed artist, it strengthened our practice-based research expertise and approach underpinning the Lyrical Bodies research project design. Analysing the choices made by festivals and theatres to programme artists, theatre makers and playwrights can reveal bias and systemic inequalities. In 2015, to commemorate the 1916 centenary, the National Theatre of Ireland, the Abbey, released a programme comprising 10 plays, with one written by a woman. The then artistic director, Fiach McAneil, defended his programming choices in a tweet. "I don't and haven't programmed plays on a gender basis. I took decisions based on who I admired and wanted to work with. Sometimes plays we have commissioned by and about women just don't work out. That has happened. Them's the breaks." This tweet sparked Lian Bell to mobilise the theatre community, creating the Waking the Feminists movement, which campaigned for equality for women working across all areas of Irish theatre. This campaign produced groundbreaking research published by Drs Brenda Donoghue, Ciara O'Dowd, Tanya Dean, Ciara Murphy, and Kathleen Cawley and Kate Harris, analysing data from 10 of the top publicly funded theatre organisations to create a baseline from which social change can be measured. Deevy's Katie Roach was first staged by the Abbey in 1936, and in 2016, the incoming artistic directors invited Caroline Byrne to direct it as a response to the call for equality in programming. Downstairs in the same building, Amanda Coogan, in collaboration with Dublin Theatre of the Deaf, performed an appropriation of Deevy's 1935 text, The King of Spain's Daughter, produced by Live Collision as part of the Dublin Fringe Festival. Una and I contributed to an Abbey Theatre research pack on Deevy at this time, writing about Talk Real Fine Just Like a Lady, a performance exploring Deevy's work as Coogan describes her as, quote, a prototype feminist, a prototype deaf woman, end quote. The immersive performance invited the audience, and I'm quoting Amanda here again, to radically reimagine the relationship between language, gender, power, and theatre making. Una and I published our analysis of that production in volume 1 of a 2-volume collection of essays on Irish women playwrights and theatre makers entitled The Golden Thread, published in 2021. Talk Real Fine also functioned as part of the Irish Sign Language community's successful campaign for the recognition of ISL as an official language of the state. The recognition of Irish Sign Language for the Deaf Community Bill was signed into law in December 2017.
An overview of Barbara Lemaster's intra-sign language variation research helpfully contextualizes the impetus behind Lyrical Bodies. Lemaster's research analyzes the erasure of women's sign from ISL by critiquing how sign language in Ireland developed along gender lines due to the fact that residential schools for the deaf, where ISL developed and was taught, were segregated by gender. In Ireland, in the mid-1800s, 2 residential institutions were established for deaf children, St. Mary's School for Deaf Girls and St. Joseph's School for Deaf Boys. Residents of these schools were taught sign language, and in the absence of a commitment to align or unify the developments in the respective schools, sign lexicons emerged with distinct differences. The respective lexicons became known as St. Mary's and St. Joseph's School signs. Lemaster asserts that these were, quote, different enough to obscure communication, end quote, but that as adults, ISL users informally negotiated and resolved lexical differences, typically favouring the St. Joseph's or the male lexicon as a standard. Dublin Theatre of the Deaf incorporate women's sign into their performance work to retain and recoup those signs into Irish Sign Language, but also to make a comment on the intersectional discrimination experienced by deaf Irish women. The Lyrical Bodies project continues this work to recoup and make visible women's sign. Deaf activist Alvin Jones argues that, quote, deafness is not 2 distinct categories that you can easily assign people to, end quote, explaining that the term deaf covers a range of audiological states in which some people identify as deaf with a capital D, some as hard of hearing, and some as deaf with a lowercase d. She proceeds to explain, however, that people within each of the 3 categories, that is deaf with a capital D, hard of hearing, and deaf with a lowercase d, commonly experience negative connotations because most often the word deaf is understood and categorized as loss. Fiona Murphy articulates this in her explanation of why the word deaf is capitalized within the deaf community. And I'm quoting, when capitalized, deaf refers to individuals who use sign language and identify culturally as deaf. When it appears in lowercase, deaf is used for anyone with hearing loss who considers it in the same way as medicine does, a deficit, end quote. Murphy's explanation of when and why the word deaf is capitalized reflects the dominance of the biomedical or individual model of disability as the dominant ideological construction used to understand and explain deafness as a problem located inside the bodies of some people who are then characterized as physiologically defective. Jones defines deafhood as an empowering journey, a position which aligns with the Deafhood Foundation's promotion of deafhood as, quote, a journey that a deaf person undertakes to discover his, her, or their identity and purpose in life. Deafhood focuses on a reframing of the historical, cultural, and linguistic reality of deaf people in the world from one that is minimizing, oppressive, or damaging, end quote. Jones often works with Leanne Quigley. Quigley, also a deaf activist, seeks to expose the intersection of autism and sexism in relation to deaf women. Unsurprisingly, Jones and Quigley reject the biomedical model of disability, which, as Nario Redmond argues, promotes, quote, an understanding of physical causes and the use of diagnostic tools to prevent impairments, reduce symptoms, and ideally eradicate individual abnormalities, end quote. Quigley and Jones expose how it is society's construction of deafness, rather than biology, that disables deaf people. Capitalizing the word deaf thus recognizes deafness as a social category and deaf people as a group who share a particular history, which is often a history of discrimination. Deafhood also embraces the concept of deaf gain. The concept of deaf gain, as I currently understand it, is that deaf experience incorporates valuable, refined, and particular methods of experiencing and interacting with the world that are different rather than less than those of hearing people. Lyrical Bodies involves students and staff from Southeast Technological University's School of Humanities, performance artist Dr Amanda Coogan, deaf artists and activists Alvine Jones and Leanne Quigley from Dublin Theatre of the Deaf, and Irish Sign Language interpreters Caoimhe Coburn Gray and Elizabetha Chicocha, working together to investigate Deevy's ballet possession via a practice as research project. Lyrical Bodies explores themes of respect and inclusion and considers how Deevy reflected on the socio-cultural environment of the mid-20th century. The project additionally considers how women were dispossessed of status, achievement, and opportunity in mid-20th century Ireland, and explores how deaf women continue to experience and challenge intersecting discriminations of ableism and gender-based disempowerment. Lyrical Bodies builds on established work, including the curation and editing of a collection of scholarly essays that consider Deevy's work entitled Active Speech, Critical Perspectives on Teresa Deevy, which will be published as an open access publication in 2023.
Lyrical Bodies is designed in 3 phases as detailed here. Phase 1 of the project involved participants and researchers considering ableism and learning about Irish Sign Language. The practice-based work involved a collaborative and creative process whereby Jones and Quigley selected key scenes within the ballet Possession and guided participants in devising ways of interpreting these scenes through physical theatre, incorporating aspects of ISL and women's sign. This phase of the work was also informed by a lecture on deaf culture and deaf theatre practice delivered to all participants by Quigley and Jones. Phase 2, currently ongoing, sees Coogan, Quigley and Jones workshopping key scenes from Possession with participants. My role, which is different to the role of practitioner researcher taken by Kate and Una, is to document the performance practice work and to create digital stories reflecting on the project. Additionally, I record group discussions via video that reflect on performance practice work and the socio-political context of the text, and I photograph participants as they engage in the process. Phase 3 is the write-up and dissemination phase, involving public lectures, digital story creation, conference papers, research seminars, and publications. The Lyrical Bodies team plans to apply for funding during this phase for one or more open access publications, documenting, analysing, and reflecting on the project. There are 9 main aims of the project, but we've tried to distill these down for you here. Una and Kate have written and presented papers about Teresa Deevy's plays, but Possession is a text that has never been performed or researched. We are in a unique position because not only are we examining this text from scholarly perspectives, but Kate and Una are participants in, and we each observers of, the process of its reclamation by deaf theatre practitioners. As the second point on the slide notes, this encourages us and all who will read or listen to or watch the outputs in the future to consider one's own unconscious bias and the ways in which theatre work and artwork of other kinds is often ableist, gendered, or otherwise exclusionary. This, of course, requires that as part of the process, we consider the assumptions made about deaf history and culture in Ireland, as is noted in point 3 here, as well as recognise the gendered nature of ISL. Finally, a project like this requires that we consider how best to share the findings with the research community, the deaf community, and the public. It is incumbent upon us to consider accessible and inclusive means of dissemination, such as today's signed presentation, subtitled, videoed, signed podcast episodes, and subtitled signed digital stories, as well as the traditional academic ways of sharing research. This is very much in line with DORA principles, which promote equity and diversity in research dissemination.
The Lyrical Bodies project design aligns with 2 feminist approaches to theatre historiography, as explained by Teresa Deevy as follows. The recovery and revision of, quote, women's activities in contrast or opposition to dominant traditions, end quote, and the act of reclaiming lost plays and uncanonized playwrights. Current scholarship challenges dominant narratives and seeks to understand what Claire Cochrane and Joe Robinson call narratives of erasure. Such narratives are evident in theatre programming, for example, as well as theatre history and its archives. Critiques of the androcentric nature of the Irish Theatre Archive reveal that it is dominated by literary texts and focused on select institutions such as the Abbey. In considering Deevy's Possession, it is appropriate that historiographic and practice-based research approaches inform our research design. Practice as research refers to a wide range of research activity and denotes the following. Practice-based research, where, as Linda Candy explains, quote, the creative artifact is the basis of the contribution to knowledge, end quote, and the research is then articulated through practice and scholarship. Practice-led research, where the research is about practice, but may not result in a creative artifact. And practices research, where the research consists entirely of the creative practice without a critical output. The aims and objectives of Lyrical Bodies can only be addressed via creative practice and what Jenny Hughes calls the scholarly apparatus. This scholarly apparatus is important, but only if the practice informs the generation of theory. The data collected will therefore be qualitative in nature and collected via archival research, digital documentation such as the video, photo and audio recordings, and document analysis. In practice-based research, The documentation of the creative process is important in providing different perspectives so that researchers can analyse the process. Multiple perspectives on the process also helps mitigate against practitioner-researcher bias. In using document analysis as a tool, we take the broad meaning of the word document, which may refer to a text-based document located in an archive or a photograph or artworks. These documents are distinct from those created by the digital data collection tools in that they are not generated by the research team. The project team is also keeping reflective journals in order to create specific and stable notes, which also help to reduce researcher bias.
The ethical challenges of the project are manifold. We have selected to highlight two of these. The first is the challenge to ensure equal access to participation and dissemination outputs for deaf and hearing participants and researchers. Lyrical Bodies is designed to be fully accessible in each of the three phases. An ISL interpreter translates during each project phase, assisting with communication between participants and researchers. All research seminars, digital stories, public lectures, and/or conference presentations will be designed and delivered as accessible to deaf and hard of hearing communities through ISL translation and/or hard copy document provision and/or audio captioning. As part of this, we face the challenge of designing the practice-based research occasions as spaces of mutual linguistic respect. ISL is an official language of the Irish state, as Kate mentioned, and the Indigenous language of the Irish deaf community. ISL is a full language with, quote, its own complex linguistic structure, rules, and features. It is a visual and spatial language with its own distinct grammar. And not only is it a language of the hands, but also a language of the face and body, end quote. As one of the aims of the project is to analyse how ISL is a gendered language and how ISL is incorporated within theatre practice of Dublin Theatre of the Deaf, the ethical challenge is to create a working and research environment which respects the complexity of ISL as a language and to afford it equal importance within the languages used by the research team and participants. Kate and I have recently undertaken a programme of study to learn basic ISL to better appreciate deaf culture and the complexities of ISL as a language. The second ethical challenge we wish to focus on is the challenge to avoid an inappropriate exclusion of women researchers and/or participants. Lyrical Bodies is designed to combat the inappropriate exclusion of women as researchers and participants. The inclusion of women in research, quote, improves the generalizability of research findings to women where that is a goal of the research and is essential to ensure that women and men benefit equally from research, end quote. Members of the research team or participants caring for young children who wish to bring these children with them to any phase of the project are invited to do so. Accommodations are made during each phase of the project for caring needs and responsibilities to take place. Children attending any phase of the project are not considered participants in that their participation will not be analysed. Parents bringing children to the workshops are, however, asked to support their child to complete a specifically tailored GDPR consent form and SETU photo and video release form.
As well as being a member of the Performing the Region research group, I am also a member of Teach CoLab, which is a global teaching project that connects staff and students in academia across two institutions, the University of Washington and SETU, and examines specific and pertinent health-related issues through a cross-cultural lens. Through that project, a professor in the University of Washington, Dr. Jodie Early, introduced me for the first time to basic digital storytelling as a reflection tool in the classroom and to collaborative online international learning, COIL. Through collaborative online international learning, we used it with two sets of students who introduced themselves to one another via these stories. I went on to do 3 online training courses in digital storytelling through Story Center in Berkeley, California, who first developed the specific approach that I use. These have included a basic digital storytelling course focusing on digital storytelling as a reflective practice tool, a certificate in digital storytelling, including facilitation skills, focusing on digital storytelling as a participatory media practice, and an advanced course in story mapping, involving the integration of mobile documentary media with geographical mapping software. To explain, a digital story in its basic form is an edited series of photos and/or video footage that accompanies a voiceover narration created by the storyteller. The story is personal in nature, so it may be a way of processing or reflecting on a major personal life event like a death or promotion, or a way of thinking through a small moment at work, for example, that was important to the storyteller for some reason. Here, I will be using the techniques a little differently, but still trying to piece together participant reflections on the process of workshopping this ballet. In practice-based research, many digital technologies have been used to document performance processes, and so the raw footage and the digital stories are particularly important here in providing a range of perspectives on the work, considering that Una and Kate, as researchers in this case, are also participants. It is envisaged that I will create a series of interconnected digital stories on foot of the project that capture the process of practice-based research and the reflective discussions that are built into the design of the workshops. This means that the digital stories that are produced will have a twofold purpose: to form part of the documentation of the process and to constitute a creative artifact and output of the project in their own right.
Thank you all so much for attending today and for listening. We want to acknowledge the many people, collaborators, researchers and MIN support who make our research possible and make our research and teaching so enjoyable. So here is a long list of people to thank today, and we're so grateful to everyone for supporting us. So we'd like to invite questions and we'll provide some answers, but questions from the audience. And thank you again.
And just to say, we'll stop recording now.